This first story still makes the hairs on my arms stand up. It happened during the summer after my freshman year of college. I was home in rural upstate New York, looking for a way to make some extra cash. A family friend told me about a temporary night shift job archiving old town records at the local public library. It sounded boring, but the pay was great, and I thought it'd be peaceful. Peaceful was the last thing it was. The job required me to scan and organize decades worth of town history, property deeds, and even old police reports. My shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. The library was huge, a beautiful old stone building, and at night, it was dead silent and completely empty save for me and the security guard, Tom, who was usually asleep in his booth by midnight. I worked in a tiny office tucked away in the lowest level, down in the archives. The air was perpetually cold and smelled of dust and forgotten paper. I had been there about a week when the strange things began. It started with the lights. The archives had old fluorescent tubes that hummed constantly, but sometimes one would flicker or go out entirely, only to snap back on a minute later. At first, I figured it was just the old wiring. Then came the sounds. Around 2 a.m. every night, without fail, I would hear a faint scraping noise. It wasn't loud, just a rhythmic shoo-shoo-shoo sound that seemed to come from the main shelving aisles outside my office. I went out and checked a few times, but never found anything out of place. The shelves were floor-to-ceiling metal racks, filled with heavy, bound books. One night, the scraping was louder. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the archive's temperature. I grabbed my phone flashlight and stepped out. The long, narrow aisle was completely dark, save for my beam. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" Only silence answered. As I turned to go back to my desk, I noticed something on the floor. It was a faint trail of dust and grime, a straight line running down the middle of the aisle about a foot wide. It looked like something heavy had been dragged. My heart pounded. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a cleaner had left a mop. But no one was down here but me. The next night, I was determined to figure it out. At 1:55 a.m., I turned off my desk lamp, left my office door ajar, and hid behind a tall stack of boxes near the entrance to the archives. I held my breath and waited. Right on time, at 2:02 a.m., the scraping began. It was closer this time, and I realized it wasn't scraping metal, it was scraping stone. Slowly, I peeked around the boxes. What I saw was horrifyingly simple. A figure was moving down the aisle. It was tall and incredibly thin, draped in what looked like tattered gray cloth. But the scraping wasn't coming from its feet. It was dragging something. I strained my eyes in the gloom. It wasn't dragging a box or a mop. It was dragging a stone slab. The slab was roughly the size and shape of an old headstone, and it left that distinctive trail in the dust. The creature dragging it wasn't walking naturally. It moved with a jerky, unsettling gait, like a broken puppet. The worst part was that it was moving toward a corner of the archive that held the oldest and most sensitive town records, the mortality indexes. I was paralyzed, utterly terrified. I couldn't even scream. I watched as the figure reached the dead end of the aisle. It carefully leaned the stone slab against the shelving, and then it looked up. It didn't look at me directly, but its gaze swept the room, and even from my hiding spot, I felt that ancient, cold presence wash over me. I saw its face for a split second. It was featureless, or perhaps just completely obscured by shadows, but it gave the immediate impression of profound sorrow and emptiness. The figure then turned its back to me, and I saw it open a book. A massive, leather-bound ledger from the mortality records. It slowly ran a bony, elongated finger down the page, and as it did, I heard the faintest whisper, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was one of eternal lament. This went on for maybe 5 minutes. I was ready to bolt, but I knew if I moved, the sound would carry in the silence. Finally, the figure closed the book, picked up the stone slab, and began to drag it back the way it came. The scraping noise slowly faded away until the only sound was my ragged breathing. I didn't go back to my office. I crept out of the archives, past the soundly sleeping security guard, and waited until 6 a.m. outside in my car. I quit the job the next morning, making up an excuse about an early start to classes. I never told anyone what I saw. I think the scraper was a guardian of those records, or perhaps a soul trapped by them, forced to drag a headstone through the archives every night, searching for its own name. Sometimes, even now, when I'm alone in a quiet room late at night, I hear a faint, phantom shoo-shoo-shoo sound, and I turn on every single light in my house. This happened to my cousin, Liam, a few years ago. He was living in a small apartment complex in Phoenix, Arizona. Nothing special, just a boxy, modern building with a shared courtyard and a pool. Liam's work schedule was erratic. He often worked through the night, meaning he slept during the day. The complex had a strict, if rarely enforced, quiet hours policy from 10 p.m. to 8 a.m. The issue started with his neighbor, who lived in the unit directly above him. She was an older woman, quiet, kept to herself, and seemed perfectly normal. But every single morning, precisely at 7:45 a.m., a terrible rhythmic pounding would start on her floor, directly above Liam's bed. It sounded like someone dropping a bowling ball or maybe repeatedly hitting the floor with a sledgehammer. It would last for 5 to 10 minutes and then silence. It was loud enough to not just wake him up, but to actually rattle the picture frames on his walls. At first, Liam was annoyed. He was sleeping after a 16-hour shift, and this was unacceptable. He went upstairs, knocked, and the woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. Delgado, answered. She was sweet, frail, and extremely apologetic. "Oh dear, I'm so sorry. I'm an early riser," she said, but she never actually explained the noise. She just promised it wouldn't happen again. The next morning, 7:45 a.m., the pounding returned, just as loud as before. This went on for 3 days. Liam was furious. He spoke to the building manager, who sighed, shrugged, and said Mrs. Delgado had been a resident for decades and never caused trouble. He suggested Liam just try to talk to her again. On the 5th morning, Liam was ready. He set his alarm for 7:30 a.m. He wanted to be standing at her door when the noise started. The minute his alarm went off, he threw on a shirt and ran up the stairs. He stood right outside her door, listening. The apartment was silent. Not a sound. 7:45 a.m. The time clicked over on his phone. And then, the boom 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 started. But here's the kicker. It was coming from inside her apartment. Liam pounded on the door. "Mrs. Delgado, stop it. What are you doing?" The pounding continued right behind the door, so loud it vibrated under his fist. He heard Mrs. Delgado's frail voice, but it was muffled, like she was behind several layers of thick fabric. She was sobbing. "I can't stop. I can't stop it, young man. Please, leave." Liam was confused. If she was inside, and the noise was inside, what was it? He backed up, leaning his ear to the door. The pounding stopped abruptly, followed by a heavy, dragging sound, the same sound he had heard in his own apartment. Then he heard Mrs. Delgado's voice clearly, right through the thin door, but it was a low, guttural hiss. "He'll be quiet now. He'll be quiet 0008:19 now until tomorrow." Liam practically flew down the stairs. He stayed away from her for a week, but the 7:45 a.m. pounding continued. He started to get paranoid. Why was she hiding what she was doing? Why the weird voice? He decided he had to know. He started looking up Mrs. Delgado in old city records, using his police scanner contacts. He found nothing. Then, his neighbor on the other side of Mrs. Delgado told him a creepy story. About 10 years prior, Mrs. Delgado had a son, a man in his 30s, who was mentally disabled and prone to violent outbursts, especially in the mornings. He was always hitting things, throwing furniture, and making noise. The son vanished one day. Mrs. Delgado told everyone he had gone to live with an uncle out of state. The loud noises stopped for a few years. But about 3 years ago, the neighbor said, the pounding started again, always at 7:45 a.m. The neighbor swore he had seen Mrs. Delgado carrying a large, black duffel bag down the stairs late one night, but he never thought anything of it. Until now. Liam went back to the building manager with his suspicions. The manager agreed the behavior was bizarre and agreed to go up with Liam, claiming a maintenance check. Mrs. Delgado let them in, but she looked exhausted and deeply agitated. Her eyes were bloodshot. The manager began checking the sink and the electrical panel. Liam wandered toward the bedroom, which was directly above his own. The bedroom door was cracked open. The room was sparsely furnished, but in the center of the floor, there was a very noticeable circle of wear on the carpet, where all the fibers had been flattened or rubbed threadbare. Mrs. Delgado suddenly shrieked, "Get out! Get away from there!" Liam jumped back. He didn't see anything, but he was sure the pounding was tied to that specific spot. They left shortly after, the manager visibly shaken by Mrs. Delgado's breakdown. The next morning, 7:45 a.m., the pounding started again. But this time it was different. It was frantic, weaker, and it started to sound less like a ball and more like a human body thrashing against the floorboards. Then, a new sound. Mrs. Delgado's high, mournful wail. It was a sound of true, unbearable grief. The thrashing stopped. The wailing continued. Liam packed his bags and moved out that day. He never called the police, afraid of what he might find, or what he might be accused of seeing. He just needed to be away from that apartment. I don't know what was making the noise, whether Mrs. Delgado was torturing someone, or something was torturing her. But I know that Mrs. Delgado still lives in that apartment, and every morning, right before the quiet hours end, the pounding starts. Music. My name is Caleb, and I'm a trucker. I drive long-haul freight, usually cross-country, pulling everything from furniture to frozen goods. You spend a lot of time alone, out on the open road. You see a lot of weird things, but one experience stands out as the most bizarre and terrifying thing that has ever happened to me. I was driving through the Nevada desert late one Monday night. I was heading east on I-80, a stretch of road known for being desolate and pretty monotonous. It was after midnight, pitch black, and I was running on pure energy drinks. I saw a sign for a truck stop coming up. It was one I hadn't seen before, just a tiny pin on the GPS. The waypoint. I decided to stop to grab a coffee and stretch my legs. I pulled off the highway onto a long, unmarked access road. The waypoint itself was small and run down. A single building, the size of a large shed, with one flickering neon sign that read, "Fuel Coffee Rest." The parking lot was gravel, mostly empty, with only one other tractor trailer parked near the entrance. I parked my rig, climbed out, and the first thing I noticed was the smell. It wasn't the usual diesel and fried food smell of a truck stop. It was faintly sweet and metallic, like old pennies and cheap perfume. I went inside. The air conditioning was blasting cold. The interior was almost completely barren. One old woman was behind the counter, reading a paperback. She didn't look up, just pointed toward the coffee machine. I noticed the other driver from the parking lot. He was sitting in the corner at a small table, hunched over a plate. He was a huge man wearing a faded baseball cap, and he looked totally defeated. I poured my coffee and sat down a few feet away from him. I nodded a greeting. He didn't respond. He didn't move. He was just staring at his plate, picking slowly at his food with a fork. I saw what he was eating. A plate of spaghetti and meatballs. Nothing else was on the menu, just a sign scrawled in Sharpie that said, "Special. Spaghetti." I finally spoke up. "Long night, huh?" The man didn't look up. His voice was a dry, cracked whisper. Longest night of my life." I tried to make conversation, asking where he was headed. He just shook his head. "It doesn't matter where I'm headed," he mumbled. "Only where I stop." Then he finally looked up at me. His eyes were wide and bloodshot, filled with a raw, consuming terror. He leaned forward. "You didn't see the sign, did you? The one before the turnoff?" I told him I just saw a regular truck stop sign. He let out a desperate, wheezing laugh. "The real sign, the one right next to the road, hidden in the brush. It said, 'The Waypoint. Leave your burden here.'" I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. "What burden? What are you talking about?" He pushed his plate away. "You see this? I've been here 3 days. I haven't slept. I haven't been able to leave. Every time I try to drive away, my truck engine dies a mile down the road, and I have to walk back. He gestured to his spaghetti. The noodles looked unnaturally pale, and the meatballs were a sickly, dark red. "This isn't food," he whispered, his voice cracking. "It's the deal." He said the old woman, the proprietor, came to him the first night and offered him the meal. She said, "Eat this and you'll be free of your load. You'll never have to carry it again." I thought she meant the freight. I signed the receipt, but she didn't mean the freight. He leaned in closer, and I could smell the sweet, metallic scent emanating from his clothes. She meant my grief. He explained he was mourning his wife who had died in a sudden accident a year prior. The grief had been consuming him. "She took it," he said, tears finally streaming down his face. "She took the pain. I feel nothing now. No sadness. No joy. Just emptiness." He then revealed the truly disturbing detail. "The meatballs, Caleb, they taste like her favorite flowers." The old woman, who hadn't looked up once, suddenly let out a low, satisfied chuckle. The other trucker looked completely broken. I didn't lose the pain. I lost the memory of what it was like to feel. I stood up instantly, my coffee forgotten. The old woman finally looked at me, her face a mask of serene, unsettling calmness. "Going so soon, dear? Don't you want to leave your worries behind? Make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more great videos like this. Thanks. The special is on all night." I stumbled out, ignoring her. I jumped into my cab and didn't bother with the engine. I just coasted out of that gravel lot, all the way to the highway access road, before turning the key. My engine roared to life. I looked in my side mirror as I drove away. In the single beam of the waypoint sign, I saw the other trucker, standing outside his cab, his eyes fixed on me, absolutely hollow. I drove 500 miles without stopping. I never saw the access road or the waypoint sign again. I still drive that route, but every time I pass that desolate stretch of I-80, I listen to the silence and pray I don't see a flicker of neon in my periphery. I have my own burdens and I plan on keeping them.